of our members.
Thank you. I think Amanda is going to share the slides. Is that right, Amanda?
Yes, it is. So stay with me one moment
Okay.
while I just bring them up and share them. That will be, it's thinking, come on. There we go. Full screen.
And thank you, Georgie. I will touch on John Travolta.
Yes. Actually, just give me 1 second. Here we go. Share screen. Okay.
Excellent. Thank you, Amanda. I can see the slides and hopefully everybody else can see those. Firstly, it's really great and such a privilege to be invited here today to share with you a snapshot of my journey as a contemporary poet and some of the ways I've been using poetry to create positive impact in society. I would really have loved to have been with you face to face. I've been to a couple of the face-to-face events, but it's not to be, but hopefully this online session will be a little bit fun and will capture the essence of how the literary word of one person can really be amplified to drive change in the world. But I'm going to briefly just go back to where it all started. As a child, I was raised on a council estate in the northeast of England. It's a Geordie accent if you're trying to guess. But my father died very young in his 40s. It was sudden. And my mum remarried not just once, but several times. And it was an incredibly challenging home and quite neglectful and quite a loveless childhood, to be honest. And my mum and I are now estranged. At school, it was even worse. I was bullied relentlessly for most of my high school years. So I left school at 16 and I moved on my own on a one-way bus to London with £90 in my pocket, but a lot of ambition. I got a job, I put myself through night school and I worked my way up the corporate ladder. And today I have a full-time day job as well as being a writer. I'm the managing director on a global Fortune 500, for a global Fortune 500 organization, and I sit on their board. The company is Adecco, which is the world's largest provider of staffing and HR solutions. In the spare time I don't have, I've also got 2 kids and a fly-in, fly-out husband who is away most of the year. And I'm an author of 6 books, 3 which are poetry genre in the contemporary space that I'm going to touch on today. Next slide, thanks, Amanda. So much of my childhood and that upbringing really inspires my poetry and writing. And as a young girl, I just remember reading under the duvet with a torch, Enid Blyton and everything I could get my hands on to escape the reality of this really sort of tough home and tough school. And I also, from a really young age, began to write daily. And in my 20s, I think I was in my early 20s, I had a few poems published in the UK. And in my 30s, I was really fortunate to be signed up by a literary agent after some of my work placed in some different literary competitions. So it was this hugely exciting moment to be signed up by an agent. One day, I began looking at all these poems that I had been writing in notebooks and on my laptop, and I record them on the voice app on my phone. And whenever I get some inspiration, I try and capture it. And I had hundreds and hundreds of poems, many of them on the theme of bullying, which I guess stems from childhood. I had this underlying theme as well of urban life, and I really tend to see the beauty in a concrete jungle still. And I often write about the streets and graffiti as well, which I see as a bit of a misrepresented art form, in that street murals are often not always vandalism. Many are really commissioned and carry, you know, amazing artwork and an underlying social justice message, which resonates a lot with me. So my debut poetry collection was called Graffiti Lane, and it was formed around these inspirations on bullying and graffiti on the streets. And the manuscript was picked up by a publisher and released in 2019. And the cover that you can see on the left, the darker cover, that is Hosier Lane in Melbourne. And the cover on the right is a corner of Hosier Lane also. The book was in print, ebook, hardback. A coffee table limited edition came out, which fused some street photography and street murals, which matched the poems. It was very cool. And just this month, it was released also in audio format. It's my first audio book a couple of years after release. And this book became a #1 bestseller in Australia and in the UK, and reached this huge global audience of youths and adults. So this is kind of where it all started. Next slide. Thanks, Amanda. Yeah, so on this journey, I really began to leverage poetry to help underprivileged youths. I'm a mentor for a not-for-profit organisation called Share the Spark in New South Wales, helping at-risk youths to follow creative career pathways, such as being a writer or a poet, and not just following academic routes into employment. My contemporary kind of really raw, gritty style, it seems to resonate a lot with youths, and it breaks some of the traditional modes of poetry, and I try and make it really hip and accessible. I use social media a lot and media platforms, and I of late have been making poetry short films that have been streaming in various sort of forums to also target this different audience. My poems from Graffiti Lane generated interest from another Australian organisation called Student Edge, and they've used me as an ambassador to cascade messages to their cohort of 1.1 million students on bullying and cyberbullying and how to remain resilient during exams. And I launch all kinds of poetry and haiku competitions and all kinds of things on these sorts of themes to help this, more than 1 million Australian students, which is just incredible. I now speak a lot in schools, universities, and in different youth communities, and I use poetry to cascade messages that I care about, to generate cultural change around the impacts of bullying and the importance of having respect for one another. The poetry kind of went viral, and it's been all over TV now, on CBN TV in Los Angeles, the BBC in the UK, the Today Show on TV, ABC Radio, many, many other outlets, and also in print in more than 100 newspapers and lots of prestige magazines as well. And it's just created this ripple effect in getting my message out to a much broader audience about these social issues that I'm just so passionate about and thankful that I am privileged to have this new stage. Next slide, thanks. Yeah, so Georgie mentioned Oz Mums. So in 2020, I am a working mum, and I juggle the many hours and different sort of hats of my life. In 2020, I won the Oz Mumpreneur Changing the World Gold Award for using poetry as a vehicle to raise anti-bullying awareness in these underprivileged youth communities, which was a really special kind of moment. And I also in the same year won several other awards, including the most powerful influencer, because my tribe has grown to more than 100,000 followers across different social media platforms. And I also had another award win on Raw Success Gold Awards for Best Book, which was for that debut book, Graffiti Lane. Off the back of all of this, I expanded into performance poetry, performing at some of the major slams around the world and at festivals like Melbourne Spoken Word Festival and different fringes, again, to broaden the audience. And I began to receive like all of these sort of private messages from youths who were starting to turn to poetry as an outlet for their stresses. Some youths who sadly had been suffering mental health decline or had suicidal thoughts or real challenges at home or at school, and were finding solace in my hard-hitting poetry. And I guess just inspiring even one youth in this sort of space to find some hope and some resilience in an otherwise tough life. I've found my real purpose as a poet in this space. Yeah. Next slide. Yeah, so a little bit on the celebrity piece. So I have to share this little exciting moment, or a few crazy moments. So copies of Graffiti Lane were gifted in the 2020 Oscars swag bag, which goes to all of the Academy Award winners and nominees. And a copy was, I actually got this bizarre email one day to say a copy had been left in Robert De Niro's suite. And the same thing happened with my second book called Punch and Judy, was also gifted to Oscars winners in 2021. And yeah, my book is now on the bookshelves of everyone from Ellen DeGeneres and Lady Gaga to iconic directors like Martin Scorsese and Tarantino. And yeah, lots of actors now have it, and actresses, including Brad Pitt, Leonardo DiCaprio, Tom Hanks, Anthony Hopkins, Scarlett Johansson, Charlize Theron, many, many more. And I ended up at a VIP private event. Myself and my son went along. My teenage son is an aspiring movie director who makes all my short poetry movies. And we ended up meeting John Travolta backstage, and I personally accosted him, gave him a copy of Graffiti Lane, and he was so polite and so kind. It was a really crazy celebrity madness moment that's just spun out of, you know, this childhood poetry dream that I had, and it's just great to see such huge traction of poetry in these new circles. Next slide. Just the second poetry collection. It's called Punch and Judy, and this one also became an instant #1 bestseller on launch day. It hit #1 ahead of Rupi Kaur, which, if there's some poets online today, Rupi wrote the well-known poetry book called Milk and Honey. So yeah, it was a nice, exciting moment to hit the #1 slot above Rupi. This book focuses on modern, turbulent, imperfect love, and has an underlying theme of domestic violence, which there was a lot of challenges in my childhood home. I won't go into them, but it was problematic as a child, and you don't forget these things. So I used a theme of Victorian puppets, Punch and Judy, to depict a master and a puppetry relationship and getting tangled up in strings, and then finding ways to free yourself from this type of relationship. And this book also generated huge contact from women and men around the world who resonate with how relationships can easily digress. And this book shines the spotlight on the sadly increasing issue of domestic violence. And I'm so proud my work is just generating conversation on these topics that matter. And yeah, I'm only one voice, but I use it now with real intent to drive awareness across millions of people in society, again, around this having of respect for one another and embracing all of our differences, creating a kinder world. Last slide. I'd like to mention my latest book. This is book 6. I've got a couple of other books in the fiction space, but this book is called Retrospective. Came out this year. I wrote this entirely during the lockdown period last year, and yeah, it also hit #1 spot. And with this collection of poetry, I took a trip back down memory lane to the childhood days growing up, and I've got this whole, I'm a 70s born child, but it's an 80s vibe in the book, and all these nostalgic references to things like sweet shops and Walkmans and yo-yos. I had so much fun with this collection, even though I was challenging myself around some quite tricky childhood memories. But the core theme in this one, again, from a social impact perspective, I always write about social impact. This one is about education elitism and referencing my lack of university and this huge gap I have of leaving school at 16 and not having a higher education, yet still being able to forge a successful career for myself, both in the corporate world and as a writer, despite this. And I really want to showcase with this book that you can turn your dreams into a reality despite setbacks that every one of us have in different ways, through steely willpower and hard work and following your passions. And it has lots of musical references as well, using the likes of Pink Floyd lyrics and Another Brick in the Wall and Hey Teacher quotes. And I just really had a lot of fun. So I thought I would close with maybe doing a poem from this book, a slam poem. I do it a lot around the world on the performance poetry scene, to give you a flavor of my work, and close out with this one from Retrospective. And if it's okay with you, I'll do a poem and stop there.
Go for it.
Awesome. Okay, so this poem is called Breaking the Rules, and hopefully it gives you a flavor of the childhood and this education space I write about. I broke every rule when I graduated school. At 16, with certificates filled with GCSEs, grade A, but still no university degree, I couldn't afford to pay the fee, when everything I earned, from sweeping floors at the hairdressers, serving six-pack bread buns in the bakers, flipping burgers wrapped in greaseproof paper, went to paying the council official dividends courtesy of government lip service assistance for the four walls of rough-cast housing camouflaged in a concrete jungle. Even the SAS would struggle to rescue the girl who always knew life came with a renewed daily mission. I broke every rule when I became a mule, smuggling my underaged innocence beneath feigned self-confidence onto that bus to London down a one-way street travelling from Newcastle on a ticket bought without parental guidance. Because even though they say blood is thicker than water, it can also clot the veins, and I needed to cut the reins from my mother and never look back. And Papa didn't care since the day he left me standing alone there, while he rushed upstairs with a burst artery that flooded his heart with bleeding instead of beating, never coming back downstairs again to see the girl cut off her pigtails to transform into someone that dovetails seamlessly into society. I broke every rule when I kept my cool, because nobody who comes from a broken home wants to be broken. So I survived alone in the big smoke with a few pounds tucked in my coat pocket to pocket rocket, spending the rest on night school to show the world I was no fool, even though the Queen's English evaded thee and privilege passed over me. I was damn smart, playing the part, refining my art, giving myself a kickstart, following premeditated flow chart into a job, answering the phone, faxing memo, trying to erase the memories of neglected younger years and all the deeply rooted fears that I was never going to be good enough and imposter syndrome would forever be my only companion. I broke every rule not to be cruel, but to be kind to myself when my boss chose to remind me that I had made it so far as to fly the cuckoo's nest, and I should never rest until I succeeded in making the migration from there to here worthwhile, never clipping my own frantically flapping wings, because only you can spread those wings and fly so high. I could well see Papa, and he might just see the woman I'd grown up to be. I broke every rule when I put on a dual hat, corporate executive with a feather in my cap and a cap in my hand, working 24/7, building organizational brand, before the darkness sets in and the side hustle kicks in as a poet with deeply rooted scars ingrained in a sonnet. With that feather and cap overshadowed in mental pain from the threat of a sting from the bee in my bonnet, buzzing so loudly, it's a struggle to remember that I really did cut those pigtails off. And it's time to tell tales of truth overflowing with what's real, helping to heal this soul who broke and was put back together on an open mic, bearing every crack in the spotlight, not caring if this poem is filled with so many loose threads. It can never be wound on a spool, because I'm still the goddamn sharpest tool in the box that you can't box me into, because I'll always be the girl who broke every rule in the school, who grew into a woman who would rather rhyme to make a dime than recline and decline back into old school. Thank you very much. That's me today. And yeah, really great that you have me here. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Kelly. What an amazing voice you have. Thank you for giving us a sneak peek into your amazing world. And I look forward to getting to know you, as I do all our other members as well. So thank you very much for sharing your journey with us this afternoon. Can I introduce our next speaker? And